household in I need to ask permission to record it. First of all, thank you so much for joining the call today. It's nice to see you, and I know that it's 7 o'clock is bedtime, dinner time, so it's always difficult to find good time for everyone. So I appreciate that you has dedicated this time to this. Just very briefly, that as you have noticed, we were aiming to record this webinar just because at least we can be reused maybe by patients. So if anybody has any objection, please let us know with a message or anything else. And the other things that it's not a lot of people, but it's probably easier if everybody, as you're already doing, is mute himself when they're not talking. But at the end, obviously, we will have time for question. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly the question, or if you don't want it, just to send in a message in the message function. Today we want to introduce the DMD recruitment database pilot study. Just to introduce a few people in a way. You might know some of these faces, but I just want to introduce Phil. Do you want to introduce yourself? So Phil Kames is the project manager for the DMD Hub Central Recruitment Pilot Project. So will be the person who will answer all your questions in a way, maybe outside this webinar, but also in future weeks and months.
That's very happy myself. Nice to see everybody.
And then today, I think that the webinar will be chaired by myself and by Anne-Marie Child. Anne-Marie.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Childs. I'm one of the paediatric neurologists in Leeds, and I've been privileged to work with Michaela and Emma and Phil in trying to sort of get this project off the ground.
And then I think that the introduction will be by Emma.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Emma Heslop. I work with Phil and Michaela in Newcastle and with Anne-Marie on this project. I'm the DMD Hub manager. My post is funded by Duchenne UK, and we've been working on the hub for 6 years now. So hopefully people are familiar with it, but we'll give a little bit of an introduction during this presentation as well.
And I don't know why I assume that people know me, which is very arrogant, so I apologize for that. I'm Michela Guglieri, and I work in Newcastle, and I've been working with a few people to try to have this study up and running, this project up and running, and is really I've been involved in clinical trial and clinical research in Duchenne over the last few years, and this is really a project that aims to facilitate the research in the UK. So I think that Emma so we divide this webinar in two parts. The first part that is a brief introduction, actually not by Emily, but by Emma, because Emily unfortunately couldn't join this evening. That is a little bit to introduce the project from the patient perspective, because I think that really the project is a collaboration between Newcastle and Duchenne UK, but has the input of a much wider community compared to Newcastle and Duchenne UK. And but the idea about the project came really from a discussion between clinician and patient and families about the concern that we had about recruitment and access to clinical trial in the UK and how this was managed. So the idea was really a joint brainstorming to, in a way, share the frustration and try to address them. So we tried to present it as an introduction about what was the patient point of view, or at least the family point of view that led to the development of this project. And then Anne-Marie and I will focus more about the clinician point of view, but also the practicality about how does it work. And then we will leave as much time as possible at the end to really have an open discussion and answer any question. So I stop talking, and I think that Emma will take over.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Michaela. So as Michaela said, I'm a last minute replacement for Emily, a poor replacement. So I apologize for that. But really just to try and give you a little bit of the patient perspective, I'm sure everybody's very well aware of Duchenne UK and the fantastic work that they do, and that the DMD Hub is one of their flagship projects that they funded. Like I said, it was launched in 2015. But really just thinking about the, the overall 360 scope of Duchenne UK, they fund other projects, including DMD Care UK, which again is, working with us in Newcastle and Michaela and all of the North Star sites, Hercules around, health economics. They funded the startup of gene therapy trials. They're interested in repurposing medicines with the tamoxifen study in particular, and they have an interest in the EAMS. So, like I said, a real 360 overview of what's happening in the Duchenne community. Next slide, Phil. Yeah, and also, as I'm sure that you're well aware, Duchenne UK do a fantastic job of really representing the views of the community. And as Michaela was saying right at the start, the hub really did evolve out of a need that was identified by the community, that's being the patient community and the clinical community together. And it's very similarly for this project as well, it was what we were hearing from the patient community in terms of wanting to have access, but also fair and equitable access to clinical trials, and how it really makes parents feel when they're not able to get their children onto clinical trials, or when they feel like they're not given the opportunities to even have that possibility to get them recruited onto clinical trials. And this is one quote from a mum called Kerry, which I think resonated with all of us as well. Next slide, Phil. And quite early on in the DMD Hub, we carried out a patient survey really to try and specifically understand what your feelings were around clinical trials. And I think the results were quite striking in terms of that 91% of people who answered that survey said that they expressed an interest in taking part in clinical trials. Sorry. Yeah, and 68% of them, mainly up until that point, use social media to find out about studies, which sometimes it can be accurate, but I think in terms of the timing of when it's on social media and some of the information on there, it's not very moderated, so it's not the best source of information. And 29% of those patients who again responded had tried to enroll, but they weren't able to, which of course this causes frustrations and a little bit more anxiety and stress in an already very stressful situation. So the survey really highlighted to us that this sense of desperation felt by parents and caregivers who were unable to access research. Next slide. Next one, Phil. Yeah, so this is what really, resulted in us developing the DMD Hub network, and I'm sure that you're aware of the 11 sites across the UK that are involved in the Hub network. And one of the first tools that we established was the Clinical Trial Finder, as a direct result of that survey that we carried out together. And the Clinical Trial Finder is available on the DMD Hub website. We've done a little bit of work, quite a lot of work on it over the course of the last 5 years or so, and it is really a trusted resource for all of the trials that are happening or will be happening in the UK in the near future. And one thing that we added to the Clinical Trial Finder, again from feedback from the patient community, was not only where what trials will come into the UK, but specifically which sites those trials were going to be running at, and what the recruitment status of those trial sites were, so whether they were recruiting or not yet recruiting or fully recruited. And we work very closely with the DMD Hub site, the staff at the sites, industry as well, to make sure that all of that information is up to date and accurate. But what we also heard again from the patient community is that this can also still sometimes cause frustration in terms of, even when you know where what the trials are and where they are being run, it didn't work very well in terms of then the next step of getting recruited onto those particular trials, because it was still left up to the patients to make that initial contact with the trial sites, and there wasn't a process in place, or there hasn't been a process in place up until now. So it caused more work, stress for the patient, but also in the background a little bit more work for the clinicians as well. So we thought, well, what can we do next as a to work on this? And on the next slide you'll see Next slide, Phil. Yeah, then our answer to this was the development of the DMD Hub Central Recruitment Pilot, which is aimed to be a fair and equitable access, or to help ensure fair and equitable access to clinical trials by implementing a national process via this central recruitment list. And so I don't duplicate what's going to come in the next part of the presentation. I think I'll just stop there. Is that all right?
Thank you, Emma. I think that I'm going to start presenting the next section, but Phil has kindly prepared the slides, and I'm going to probably look to Michaela to make sure that I don't miss anything really important. But do please, if you've got queries or questions, type them into the chat and we will try and pick those up at a later stage. Can I have the next slide, please, Phil? So I think that Emma's given quite a good overview about the factors that really came together to create the hub. And I think the hub is, from a clinical perspective, has been a very useful resource. And I'm a clinician that has gone from being somebody just focused on clinical work to now working in one of the hub sites. And that has been really transformative, I think, for my understanding about access to trials. So before, I was somebody that would recruit children, young people for other centres, but I was conscious that there wasn't really a clear process and it was a little bit random. At that point, there were really 2 centres in the UK, Newcastle and Leeds, that were able to sorry, Newcastle and London, that were able to, I'm being distracted by the chat, being able to see and recruit children into clinical trials. Can I just check that people can see the slides? Is that just one person, or is it a problem for everybody?
I think if there's a little button at the top that says view options with a drop down menu, I think
Okay,
that's how you change how you view.
okay, thank you. And so, you know, I think it's been fantastic to have the hub sites, and that's increased our capacity to deliver research studies in DMD across the UK. But we're still conscious that the ability to recruit patients depends on whether or not you live near a hub site. It depends on how engaged families are with I suppose social media, with looking out for studies. And we know that there are some fantastic resources out there, and we know that there are lots of very motivated families. Presumably those of you on the call today will be those families, but there are other children and young people who could benefit from taking part in clinical trials, who perhaps haven't been able to be exposed to those opportunities. And we're really keen to make sure that access to trials is fair and equitable and doesn't depend on where you live, or your ability as a family to try and find out what's happening. And so we want to look at whether or not developing a project like this will allow us to have a better feel about the families out there wanting to take part in trials, to give us a sense of where those families are and whether or not we can use the resources across the hub to support a greater number of patients taking part. And I think there's a number of factors that we hope that the pilot will help us look at and to make progress with. You've already heard that this is a collaboration between the DMD Hub and Newcastle University and Duchenne UK. So the next slide, please. The next slide, Phil.
Sorry, there was just one additional part there, just saying that we're launching today and that the duration will be 12 months.
Sorry.
Apologies, it popped up afterwards there.
I missed that, sorry. So this, yeah, we're hoping that, having spoken to you this evening and also to the clinicians in the DMD network earlier today, that the project will go live. But if it's going to work, as you'll hear, we're going to need participation from families and from clinical teams. So we really want you to sort of spread the word about this, those of you here today, and do ask us if you've got other questions. So next slide, please. Thank you. So I think that just to sort of highlight some of the challenges that families have mentioned to us, but also that we've picked up from a clinical perspective, is that with families contacting multiple trial sites, often there's a lot of duplication of work at different sites, and that wastes effective resources and time. We know that trials are quite specific, that they have very clear inclusion and exclusion criteria, and it's really important that we don't ask families or children who couldn't fit these criteria to take part in trials or to provide information, because it's just disappointing. It raises expectations which then become crushed. So we want to make sure that the right information is available for those families wanting to take part in research, and that we're selecting those families to take part in studies for which we think they'll be eligible. And we hope that by having a central project like this, we may be able to increase the recruitment and do this more effectively and efficiently in the UK, particularly when we're looking at small studies where very specific criteria are required. For example, some studies may only be looking to recruit 3 or 4 children across the whole of the UK, and it's important that that recruitment's done quickly and fairly. And it's also important that there's a transparency to the process, because I think that's one of the things that both clinicians and families have been quite frustrated about. It's not clear why child X is enrolled and child Z isn't. And by using a process like this, hopefully we'll be able to share that information in a more transparent way. Next, please. Michaela, please chip in if there's something I've forgotten. I think, I'm not sure whether there's anything over and above what Emma's talked about that you wanted to highlight here, Michaela. Can you remind me?
No, I think that probably most of you are familiar with the DMD Hub, but what I want to highlight is that this project is really a collaboration with the DMD Hub sites. So the DMD Hub site has agreed in a way to pilot this project together, which imply something that has always been there, but is maybe probably a little bit more standardized, that all sites has agreed that within their recruitment plan, there is always the intention to offer spaces to patients that are what we call out of area, so our patients that are not strictly follow-up in one of the DMD Hub sites. This, I think that is important for the patient to understand that this creates sometimes complication, as Anne-Marie mentioned, in terms of selecting and choose the right patient, in terms of a patient that have fit the inclusion exclusion criteria. And obviously the population that is follow up at my sites, I know them better. So it's try to this is a complication in recruiting a patient out of area, but also ensuring that the distance that the patient need to cover in order to attend trial appointments is not too much of a burden for the family. So one of the commitment in a way of the Hub site taking part in this pilot study is to always ensure that within any clinical trial, some spaces are dedicated to patients that are not necessarily follow up in one of the Hub site, but also to support the site to make the recruitment of a patient out of area smooth and easier and more effective.
I mean, I think, you know, I've had experience, and I know you have, of families traveling to our site for a clinical trial to find that some of the criteria were never going to be met, and that's been really hard for families. I mean, I think, as you say, you know, we know that when a young person is familiar with his physio and is used to coming to a certain place, it means that they're perhaps going to find it easier to go through the process of the screening. But we believe that with good preparation and planning, that we'll be able to have a more effective collaboration, and we'll be able to get the confidence of those families to be able to come to another centre. So that that's what we hope, isn't it, at the end of this? So in terms of the clinical trial finders, as Emma's said, you know, that's allowed families to become aware of the trials that are up and coming, the trials that are open, and also where those trials are happening. And one of the things that we want the pilot project to do is to, in a sense, when we're allocating children to studies, perhaps outside a centre, we want to make sure that makes sense. So we want to make sure that, we're matching up the sort of geographical location as best we can. For example, if we've got a study and there are spaces for a young person to take part in that study in both Leeds and Newcastle, it would be foolish for me to be looking after one of Michaela's patients while she looks after one of ours. So the whole point of the pilot is to try and match up spaces and patients in a logical way, and that's something that will be done by the central project. The way in which it's done will depend a little bit on the nature of the clinical trial and the number of spaces that are available and the number of young people that might be suitable. But if there are more patients than spaces, then that will be done with a special sort of randomization software tool, so that it will be random. There won't be any backhanders between us to make sure that a particular patient gets enrolled. Is there anything more about this slide, Michaela, that you wanted to say?
No, I think.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Can we move on then? Thanks, Phil. Okay, so we've probably gone through this to a certain extent, but what we hope is that both families, clinicians from the Hub sites, but also clinicians who don't necessarily work within a DMD Hub site, but within the Duchenne network, will be contacting the central recruitment pilot. Now, what we will be doing as clinicians is highlighting the way in which families can take part in the Hub, that we through some information leaflets, direct contact in clinic, but we hope that by that we'll get a good participation, and we're hoping that we'll get at least 100 families who enroll in this central recruitment pilot. And then once families are enrolled, the central coordinator will review the patients and look at which patients might potentially be eligible for which studies. And as I say, then there'll be a process of random selection whereby a family are selected and offered the possibility of participating at a particular site. But at that point, or when that beginning of that process, there will have to be some further discussions between the trial site and the treating site, because it will be really important that the correct information is verified, so that again we don't bring children and families to another site without being confident that they are in a good position to take part in this study. Thank you. And so I guess one of the important things to think about is what information do we need? And clearly we will want to be collecting information, the minimum amount of information as possible in order to make this pilot work. But we will need some personal information. We'll need names. We'll need your address to be able to judge the distance involved in sites. We'll need to know date of birth, because that's a very important criteria for a lot of clinical trials. And we'll need to know NHS number and the main centre, so that we can verify the information and gather any additional information that might be required to determine the potential for screening in a particular study. We'll need to have confirmation of the genetic diagnosis. As you know, some studies are dependent on very specific genetic mutations, and it may be that we ask families to contact their site so that they can upload that information and it can be verified by the central project. We also will ask for some information about motor function and wheelchair use, again, because that's often a criteria for trial inclusion. And medication, as you know, often steroid use and length of steroid use is critical as an inclusion criteria. But in some trials, other medications could be contraindicated or could be an exclusion criteria. So we'll ask you about medication as well. Who would we like to register in the pilot? Well, we would like people with a confirmed diagnosis of Duchenne who are interested in participating in research studies. Now, we know that a lot of the research studies are targeted at a very specific group of those with DMD, but but for the purpose of this study, we would like to have a slightly more expansive involvement, so that we get a sense of those children, families, young people out there who are interested in taking part in studies, but where studies may not be available for them, because that's really important for us in negotiating with commercial and non-commercial sponsors in the future when they're thinking about trial setup. Obviously, those children under 16 who register will have to be registered by their parents or guardians, and the study's only open to people living in the UK. We can't expand this to people who might want to travel outside the UK at present.
And Marie, I just add a couple of things also in response, hopefully, to one of the question. The thing that a part of the question that, so one important point is that we will try to ask the question that are really specific for clinical trial. We all know that you are busy, and entering data is sometimes you're always constantly asked to enter data, to respond to survey. So we limited the question to area where we thought that was very relevant for participation in clinical trial. But probably what is unique of this database is that we also collect information about whether you are obviously willing to travel for participation in clinical trial. And what we ask is whether you are willing to travel for any clinical trial. And you can, in a way, distinguish to say that if maybe for a natural history study, you are willing to travel a certain distance, while for an interventional trial or for gene therapy, you are willing to travel a longer distance. And these are all data that will be captured and will be taken into account in the random selection of potentially eligible patient. So there was a comment about, obviously there is absolutely true, there are families that might live much farther compared to clinical trial site or DMD Hub sites compared to other, but they're still willing to travel. And that is exactly what we are trying to capture, to say we do not want to assume that family do not want to travel or are unable to travel, but we fully understand that for different circumstances, people might be able to travel longer or shorter, and the decision might be different depending on the nature of the clinical trial. And the other important thing is that you will, the people that are registered will ask people to keep the data updated, because one of the way that the system works is that if the information that are there are accurate, and this will obviously save time from all parties. So you will receive an automatic, let's say, reminder to update the data at least once every 6 months.
I was just looking at the chat comment there about distance and travel, and I think that, I suppose the other point is that for most clinical trials, if a person's accepted into the trial, there is usually some recompense for travel, but it doesn't recompense the time that families may take. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that that might require 2 carers to come. So we do completely understand that, and but as Michaela says, you know, what's right for one family isn't necessarily right for another. So I think we've probably covered this in the previous slides, but as well as so if we've got this database of families and children, young people who are interested in participating, then from a clinical perspective, if for example, I am involved in a clinical trial and I'm looking at, and I know that my cohort of patients perhaps doesn't comprise of any patients who would be suitable, but I can go to the trial, I can go to this pilot center and say that, you know, I'm available, I'm looking for potential patients, I've got X number of spaces, and ask for assistance in identifying patients who might be prepared to come and travel to my site for this study. And as we said, that information will then, that's provided by that's held on the central pilot, will be vetted and matched as appropriately with the trial sites, and the selection process will be random. I think one of the things that we're really conscious of in this process is we don't want to unfairly raise expectations. So being part of the pilot study and enrolling in the pilot project, unfortunately, is not necessarily going to guarantee participation in a specific study or indeed in a study at all. And I think that's a tough call. We know that for families. But we hope that by doing this, we'll make at least the process fair. I mean, again, I think we've probably gone through this and it's quite detailed, but I'm sure that the information is available on the leaflets, the electronic leaflets, which I'm sure can be sent out to all of you in the study. And and also this is going to be made available as a recording, so you'll be able to study it later.
The only things that I think that is important to highlight, that the patient that register, we will be asked to say who is your referral clinician, because it's important also to be able to contact the referral clinician and have some additional information that might not be collected in the database, but will help to assess the feasibility, the eligibility against some of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. So part of the registration is the consenting for a clinical trial sites to contact your local clinician to have more information about yourself or your child assessment.
I mean, we've talked through this, and as Michaela says, it's at this third point here where there will be a contact between the central process and the trial site, who will then directly contact the neuromuscular clinician that's looking after the child that might be a potential candidate for the study, because we will need to make sure we can verify that information and their potential eligibility. I think we've probably covered the next point. I think that, you know, we recognise this is a pilot project, and part of the project is about kind of getting your feedback and clinicians' feedback about how the process works, and that we'll be looking for feedback from all the various stakeholders in the project. We also recognise it's important to give feedback to those families who have registered in the study. And I think the plan is that we will look to perhaps have some kind of newsletter that identifies how many patients have been recruited, that looks at potentially the number of spaces that were available in a clinical trial and the number of patients who were registered with the central pilot that might have been eligible for that study, so that you can get a sense as a family about whether or not that the process seems to be working. There will clearly be huge demand for some studies and maybe less demand for others. And gene therapy trials are clearly something that people are very focused on at the moment, but the nature of those studies is that the numbers being recruited across a whole country are very small, and therefore in those studies there may well be, you know, 50 or 60 registered enthusiastic participants, and we may only be able to recruit 2 or 3 patients. But that's information that we do feel is important to share and to feedback with you. And we're also hoping that this pilot will continue and go on, but it depends on how successful we are at engaging people at this stage and over the next year. Is there anything else on that slide, or should we go to the next one, Michaela?
Can I just make a quick point about, I think, you know, it's been touched upon in terms of how this project is different from a patient registry, because I think, again, things that we heard from the patient community was that there was a bit of a misunderstanding that if they were registered on a patient registry, that was highlighting their, you know, interest in taking part in the clinical trial, but that was never actually the case. Whereas this project is specifically focused on, you know, recruitment for clinical trials. So I do just think that that's, again, worth pointing out as a clear distinction of why this is different from the national registry that already exists.
Thanks, Summer. I think that's really important, and it's the same for North Star. You know, that the registries and the current sort of databases all have a slightly different role, and you know, we're obviously been working closely together to try and pull some of that together, but this is a very specific project that we're looking at. Thank you. I think this is just to reassure you that obviously we'll be treating any personal information confidentially and according to the requisite GDPR guidance, and so the information will be securely stored on a UK server, and only people directly involved in the recruitment pilot project will be allowed to see that information. But it is important that the specific information can be shared with other healthcare professionals, and that's one of the things that those taking part will be consenting to when they enroll in the project. Thank you. So again, we've touched on this, but unfortunately we can't guarantee that registration in the project will automatically result in either an approach or actually being enrolled in a clinical study. But we do think that this is going to enhance our ability to recruit patients in a timely and fair manner. And as I say, that this is effectively a matching scheme that we're going to try and ensure is as effective as possible. But there's another stage after that matching to really determine whether or not an individual person is eligible to take part in a specific clinical trial. Does anything you wanted to add to that, Emma or Michaela? Or
no, I think that I just jump in for one of the questions that were in the chat, and I
can't read at the same time.
No, exactly, and that is my role. And we fully appreciate it. And I have to say that we have the same webinar earlier today with the clinician, and the same comment was made, and it's something that we need to learn from. That one of the problem, I agree, that is you put your name up front, whether in a single site or in a central recruitment database or in the GOSH database, in anywhere, and then you're there and you never know until someone calls you and say you have been you are potentially eligible for this clinical trial, you're interested. Otherwise is a silence, and you're there waiting for something that might never happen or might happen tomorrow. And I fully appreciate that this is very stressful. It's very difficult to manage because that uncertainty is exactly what we face. So we have a list of patients, and then I know that I don't know when the study is opening. So during that time, I cannot do much. Once the study is open, I randomly select the potential patient cohort, and then is whether I contact the family, whether they are willing to participate or whether they are eligible, and then I go to the next one. So it's very difficult for anyone to continue to contact, say you have not been selected in this round, you have not been selected in this round, and create more frustration. But I think that for that perspective, 2 points, and one was made, for example, by clinician, the other one was made today earlier by Emily from Duchenne UK. First of all, as part of the pilot, we will try to add a communication. So, and maybe it's not a personal communication in terms you have been considered for the study or you have been eligible for the study, but you have not been specifically selected for this or this reason, but at least to keep an idea about how many patients are registered and keep the information to give you an idea about how clinical trials are managed. So which study are opening, which study are behind in terms of opening. So if you are waiting, actually the study is not open and there is nothing, but maybe try to provide some guidance about timelines, but also to give an idea that sometimes, as I mentioned, there are 50 patients that are potentially eligible for a study, but actually 3 places in the country. And then put a little bit the perspective that if you have not heard anything, the reason is because there are very limited spaces compared to the potential eligible cohort. And the other things that I am pleased to say, because it was raised by Emily as a mom of 14 now, 13? 14-year-old boy with DMD. And just to share, Emily really highlighted to say is still so part of the project is also to put things in context. We are talking about research, and there is a lot of enthusiasm about research in Duchenne. We are obviously all try our best to find something that will make a difference for the children and the adults with the condition. But the reality is that there are no treatment opportunity. If you're not included in the clinical trial, you're not missing opportunity of treatment. And unfortunately, so far, we have not had a lot of successful clinical trial in Duchenne, and therefore sometimes participation in research is actually a donation of your time, effort, and commitment for a lot of uncertainty. You might receive the drug, you might receive placebo, and the probability that that drug works are sometimes not very high, and the probability that that drug will make a change in life are at the moment, unfortunately, not great. And this is not to be pessimistic. We will not do our job and we will not dedicate our time to clinical trial in Duchenne if we would not believe in what we do. But on the other hand, is put it in the right context. And I think that's part probably of the opportunity that this project give us is this kind of communication to patients with the help of you and the Duchenne UK and other patient organizations.
Thank you. I think the other point really on this slide that we wanted to talk about is just, you know, how long does it practically take to register? Well, we hope it wouldn't take you more than 20 or 30 minutes to provide the information. But you can have a look at what's being asked before you make the final decision as to whether you want to go through the process today or whether it's something you want to do at some point in the future. Thanks, Phil. I mean, this is something that we've been asked about and that has been perhaps a topic between clinicians, but one of the challenges for families who are traveling long distance for studies is, you know, what happens if an opportunity perhaps becomes available to take part in a study that's nearer to home. Well, the capacity to change between one site to another is not something that's in the gift of the hub, and it's not really something that's in the gift of the trial site itself. It's a decision that the sponsor can make. There are one or two situations where that might be feasible, but generally I think we would have to say that you know, the commitment to the study would be at the trial site where you are initially recruited. And that has been my experience over the years. Even if a more local site has opened to the study during the period of time, it's usually very, very difficult to change a patient midway through a study because it compromises the data and the robustness of the clinical trial. So I think it would be wrong to assume that you can move nearer home if that becomes convenient, because it probably won't happen. I think the other really important thing to highlight is the competitive nature of clinical trial recruitment. And again, that's not something that is in our gift, and it is really frustrating. I think that we've had some recent experience with a study that many sites in the UK had worked hard to open to recruitment to find that actually we've had one patient recruited in the UK to two studies from this company, and it's been really disappointing for families and for the clinical team setting up the studies. But those recruitment targets are not set by us. But I think the important thing is that we communicate those to you. That's the sort of information that we collect as part of the pilot project. And we've been in a situation, therefore, where a sponsor's closed a study, even though a site has identified a possible young person to screen. And that's a very difficult process for families as well. Is there anything more to add to that, Michaela?
No, I think that it's just to make everybody aware that this means sometimes that the family will be put in the situation when they know that their local site is going to open for a clinical trial. But the setup of a clinic or clinical site can be different, and one site open before another one. And that's the bureaucracy behind setting up a clinical trial. So there is the possibility where you will be put in front of the decision in a way whether you want to take part in a clinical trial in a site that is far away from your home, knowing that your site is going to open. But that is a discussion that you will need to make your own with the clinician at your site to understand what is the likelihood that they will be able to recruit you at that site. And the other thing with the acknowledgement that recruitment is competitive and therefore is a site open much later, they might not be able to recruit their initial plan. And I know that is not easy. And I think that in that case, the communication is the best thing that can help you make the decision, but is a possibility.
Thank you. I think we've probably covered that because that was on the other slide. So I think we can move on. So information, how do you do it? So this is the website where you can register online, and you can contact the hub for further information if you've got queries. And that will probably be Phil that feeds back to you on that. And this is the copy of the leaflet, the online, which can be provided as a hard copy or online. Is there anything else to highlight there? No. Okay.
I think the only other thing to say, Anne-Marie, is that patients might receive this information from multiple different sources. So obviously through their clinicians, their local clinicians when they go into their appointments, but maybe also through patient organisations, because we've we've engaged with all of the national patient organisations, and everybody thinks that this is a really good idea and have agreed to really try and help us disseminate the information and try and encourage people to sign up who are interested in taking part in clinical trials. So I guess just to apologise in advance if you receive it several times.
I can see a question from Lucy about the issue that it might say on the hub that a trial is open to recruitment and then suddenly it's closed, and I think that's probably the trial that I was referring to. I mean, I think that this is because we, as trial sites, or indeed the hub, in these multinational trials, we're not always kept informed of recruitment progress. Often sites open in the US or other centres before us, and that's what happened in this study. In that, there were, I think, perhaps the trial opening was delayed because of COVID, and then when it did open, actually it was almost full before it had started, and that was very frustrating for many people. But it's I know that Emma and the hub do their very best to keep that trial finder as up to date as possible, but sometimes we don't know, and in that situation there were lots of frustrated people who'd put a lot of work into trying to get that study going, and to find that had been completely wasted.
And I want just to clarify that sometimes when you come fully recruited, it doesn't necessarily mean fully recruited at that site or fully recruited in the UK. It's the fully recruited globally. So that is exactly what happens. So can happen that the recruitment is done somewhere else before the UK opens. So it's not that the site as recruited people when the website was saying that was not recruiting. So it's just a difference between fully recruited at the site or in the UK, or fully recruited globally. Just as a clarification.
Lucy, if you don't mind, if we do contact you directly just to confirm which site or which trial specifically talking about, because like Anne-Marie and Michaela said, we do work really hard with the trial sites to make sure that we are as up to date as possible, and also with the companies. So yeah, if it's wrong, we will sort it out.
But exactly, it's also, please use the contact the outside these kind of webinars, please contact the Duchenne Hub to highlight this, because we might have an explanation, but what might also sometimes be a human error, and therefore if it's highlighted is always good. I mean, I don't think that was the option, but
yeah, no, but I think because of COVID, it could actually be completely accurate that a trial site has been expecting to open for a year and it still hasn't opened for a particular trial because things were delayed. So yeah, but it could actually be correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask another question while I'm on? Sorry.
can I just get clarity around how it works with all the different databases now? Because I've signed up to Sarepta. So the pharmaceutical company have got a database with my name on it. The hubs have got a different, I've got a database with my name on it. And now we're going to have this one. So just clarity on the whole sort of process of who has the final say on this, or who, I didn't quite get it, sorry. So, in terms of, who has the priority say out of all the databases.
So we became aware of the Sarepta one just a couple of weeks ago, and obviously we've asked to have a call with them about that. But the difference with the Sarepta database, obviously that is one trial, is specific to a trial, and it's a global rather than a UK specific database. So we're going to work with them to make sure that it is less complicated for patients in the UK. And, we don't know what the outcome of that discussion is going to be yet, but thanks for flagging it up, because it did, obviously pique our interest and think, well, we don't want to have lots of different databases on the go. And if the clinicians in the UK are saying, go to the DMD Hub central recruitment list, then hopefully that will be the one go-to place for patients. But that's why we're doing it as a pilot, Lucy, to try and make sure that the process that we're suggesting will work.
Hi everybody, it's Caroline from Sarepta, and thank you for the question. And I want to reassure you that we will work very closely with the Hub, because ultimately this is the best way for patients to be recruited into clinical trials, and ultimately the decision is between the families and the clinicians, not Sarepta. But as you can imagine, we get a lot of inquiries directly to Sarepta, so we have our own way of sort of triaging those, and that's hence the Sarepta Ally database that you might be alluding to. But we'll speak to Philip and Emma and make sure there's clarity and there's no conflict, and if we need to clarify further with the community, we will.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. And I think that up until now there wasn't a national process in place, and I'm aware that obviously the Sarepta database has been in I think up for at least a year now.
About that, yeah, just because we're inundated, we have a lot of clinical trials inundated with inquiries, and it was just a way of systematically handling them, so that at least people felt like they were being listened to and heard. So some of the objectives are actually quite similar to this, but the thing we don't want to do is, of course, be in conflict, because as I said, the decisions ultimately are between physicians and clinicians and the families about who goes into clinical trials, not Sarepta.
Exactly. I think that, thank you, Caroline, because it's clarify, and everybody's trying to, so it is one of the role of this project, but it's just build. And actually, I think that these highlight the need of a more centralized coordination, because that is exactly what was happening before, that family contact me, contact Anne-Marie, contact London, contact Liverpool, contact Sarepta, and then we realized that we actually maybe are checking the inclusion-exclusion criteria for the same patient twice, or I know that the patient is not eligible because I have access to some information when Leeds doesn't have it or Sarepta doesn't have it, and these create a lot of duplication and frustration, and not necessarily a higher chance to be recruited in a clinical trial to the family. And that is exactly the kind of discussion that brought to this pilot study, to say there is a way to do it better. But I think that so far everybody was trying to do their best to facilitate. But one important thing that I think that is always highlight, so in the UK, first of all, I think that it's important just to mention it, that the pilot study is being piloted through the hub. So all the DMD hub sites is agreed in a way to contribute to this project. Some of you might be aware that the GOSH, so the site in London, has their own, in a way, trial list, where a patient, they record a list of patients that have expressed an interest in research and clinical trial. Although GOSH is part of this pilot project, so it's part of this project, has contributed to the development, and a lot of the input of how it's been set up is based also on their experience. They have also, in a way, at the moment, a loyalty with the patient, the family that have been added in that list. And therefore, at the moment, we will still have the pilot study, and we'll still have the GOSH list for the people that are registered on that. GOSH has agreed in a way to also advertise the pilot study to the patient, but obviously is a transition period where we still have possibly 2 lists, and you can join the both lists to be considered. Hopefully, through the pilot, we will be able to coordinate something that is on a national level. And the second point that I want to mention is that at the end, the decision is always with the site that recruited the patient. So it's the responsibility of the site that the patient that has been enrolled in a study is a patient that is the safe, is the right patient. And the right means safety, but is also that the site is able to properly monitor the patient for the duration of the study, and that there is the right decision for the family to take part. And this is the complication, that is not always a black and white. You tick the boxes of criteria A, B, C, D, and F, G, and there is always criteria that cannot be verified on a database. They need the test, and therefore, if you have an abnormal blood test, this cannot be checked by field or by a database. So there is always a more discussion about who is the right patient, and the decision is always with the person that at the end is responsible of that individual patient in the clinical trial. But we hope that this will actually support the clinician to make the right decision.
I think also we're hoping that it will take pressure off families like yourself, Lucy, of having to feel you've got to contact every single possible trial site if there's going to be a hope of enrolling your child in a study. We want you to feel that by contacting the central process, you are having access to all the possible vacancies. That's what we're trying to achieve, because we recognise that it's a horrible place for families to feel that they're in, especially if you live out with a hub site.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that was going to be my next question, actually, because I live in Wales and there are no hubs in Wales. So there will always be an element of traveling. So any Welsh family would, travel hours in the car, because that's the reality of it. So no, it sounds like a really good project. And I just hope that, that would be considered as well, that, I know you're trying to get people close to hubs because it's easier for the observations and everything, and the trial checkups and everything, but obviously there aren't any close to that side of the country as well. So yeah, hopefully it'll be a good project. So I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, and we are a few minutes after 8 o'clock. So I hope that was useful, but please, if you have any question that has not been answered today, please contact Phil. Phil, how do we share the slide and the presentation? Help me.
Michaela, do you mean can we email them out to people? Yeah.
So how can people have access to the presentation? So that is the link to register.
Yeah, so I will send the presentation out to everybody who's on the call, but also tomorrow we're going to be sending out other communications about the launch of the project as well. But as you can see here, you sign up and register. But if you've got any questions, not just about registering, but anything to do with the project, you can get in touch at dmdhub@newcastle.ac.uk, and I'll pick those up and I'll be able to respond to those, as soon as possible.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
And have a
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.